Good morning, everyone. It is 6 o'clock on a Sunday morning, October 6th, and I know it's early because I just spent like 10 minutes recording and realized that my mic was muted, so I hadn't had enough coffee yet. So, on that note, I'm now getting caffeinated. So, today's Diary of an Indie Game Dev is all about funding, crowdfunding, mismanagement of funding, pre-orders. Um, we want to talk a lot about some of the things that we've seen other companies do and things that we've done, and just talk about some of the evolution of the project in that scope. Excuse me. So one of the big things for us is that tomorrow, October 7th, we are shipping all of the collector's edition physical items from the pre-alpha pre-orders. And I gotta move that so it's not getting noise. Sorry about that, folks. Again, it's early. I'm making all sorts of fun mistakes, and I'm sitting perpendicular to the camera, which is fun. Anyway, we're shipping everything tomorrow, and it's a for us, it's a pretty big weight off our shoulders. Um, it's one of those things where we had planned early on to ship things before the game launched for a variety of reasons. First and foremost, I'd say if you look at the majority of Kickstarter projects or crowdfunded projects, the number one complaint that people have, and this doesn't have to do just with video games, this has to do with a lot of failed Kickstarter projects, um, is that the physical items often never manifest. Um, it can be 2 years, 3 years down the road, and they're either extremely late or, like I said, they just never show up. And as a general rule, that is either one of two things happening. It's either a mismanagement of funds in the case of items that, like never show up, because what happens is companies end up taking the money for the physical items and using that to pay salaries or other business expenses, and uh, leading to a situation where there's just no money left over for people to use to produce and or ship items. And the other one is just a simple accounting issue where people didn't factor in enough money for what it was going to cost to produce and or ship these physical items. Um, I know if you look at a lot of different crowdfunding kind of like 101 um, articles in the internet, you will find a lot of people talking about how you should stick to digital items, and I, for the most part, agree with that, because digital items are cheap to produce by comparison because there's no shipping cost, there's no manufacturing, etc., and it's just things that you can throw into your product or into your game. But I also would counter that and say physical items are not an issue as long as you take care of the accounting early on in the project. And what we did is we just took the money for the physical items from our pre-alpha pre-orders and just put it to the side. It was like tax money. You just don't touch it. You put that aside for taxes, you put that aside for whatever. It does not exist. It's not in an emergency fund. You just don't let yourself tap into that. It's not there to pay salaries, it's not there to pay rent, it's not there to pay, the internet or whatever. It's just there for pre-order physical items. So you just stick that to the side. So first and foremost, we were glad to be able to get that out the door and prove that we are not like the majority of other Kickstarter and or crowdfunded projects where the items are either 2 to 3 years late or never appear at all. But the second reason is just it's a nice way to say thanks to all of our pre-order people from the pre-alpha tier, because you got to admit, I mean, during any project's pre-alpha, especially our pre-alpha, it's not a pretty project, and the people are buying into you, the individual. Um, so people are buying into my vision, they're buying into me, they're buying into John, they're buying into Bobby, Richard, Wendy, Andrew, my brother, all these people on the team, they're buying into what we're selling. And to not deliver on that is shitty, but also it's just a nice way for us to say, you know what, thanks for your support even when our project was so early on. Here's this nice bonus. And it will be a nice kind of Christmas present because they will be arriving before the holiday season this year. So it's going to be nice to have those out the door and get those to everyone. So thanks to everyone for your support. Stay tuned because the collector's editions items are shipping tomorrow. John spent the weekend getting those all packed up, and then they're going out in the mail. And domestics in the U.S. are going to be about a week, probably should be a week to get delivered. International might be 2 to 3 weeks depending on where you live. But those are out the door. So signed and numbered copies of Echoes of the Past, which is book one of the Saga of Lucimia, and our cloth maps, which um, I was pretty stoked. I've got one. I'll grab it real quick and show you. Hold on. Guys, I gotta admit, it's kind of cool, to have not only your book, but also copies of the map. So it's an 18 by 24, um, and this features the main landmass, which are the kingdoms of Lucimia. Um, there will be a second map coming later on, which is going to be associated with the eventual release pre-orders, the release collector's edition. But that's later on down the pipeline. We'll talk about that here in a minute. But these are interesting because this is the very first map that Joe ever did for us back at the end of 2014. So about 6 or 8 months into the project, Joe did that map. And the one difference that you'll notice if you ever go back and look at the original map and then the eventual one that we printed out is on the top northwestern part here by the Jareth Forest. There's a town called Reneth. Um, in the original version, that was called Penneth with a P. The problem was we had a few people on the team and several community members who were like, it sounds like someone is saying penis with a lisp, and you know that eventually you're going to have a ton of trolls who are going to take that and spin it off into just stupidity. So it was like, instead of having people running around going, Pinneth, Pinneth, I just changed it to Reneth. And that's the only difference that you notice between the original 2014 map and the edition that got printed out was I went in last year, actually, no, might have been the beginning of this year. It was months before we took it to print, but again, either early this year or late last year, and I just changed the P to an R and changed that throughout the book as well, just to avoid that sort of issue. But it's really cool to have that at the door. So people who have supported us since the very beginning are getting a one-time only version of that map. There are a few versions of this still up on the store if you haven't yet seen that. So if you want to pick one up, and you didn't get a collector's edition, there are 7, I think, in total. I don't know how many people have pre-ordered maps now. Not pre-ordered, but just ordered some of the cloth maps. There were 7 that we put up for sale, I think, on Wednesday, Tuesday. I don't know. So I don't know if there's any copies left because I haven't checked the store in a while. But you can go check it out. I think there's probably copies left. See. But they are available on the store, and not on the store, in the special offers section. So there's a link in Discord, and also on our social media that you can go check out. There's also a few extra copies of the signed and numbered books for everybody. But these maps are one of a kind. We will not be printing any versions of those in the future. So these are only going to be available to the people who pre-ordered. So that's it. They're done. They're extremely rare, limited edition item because the next maps that are coming on the pipeline are actually going to be the entire known world beyond Lucimia. So we're looking at all of the content that we're going to be planning out in the entirety of the Saga of Lucimia. So many people know, but some might. Those of you watching might not be familiar with our project entirely, but um, there are, as of right now, we have 4 volumes planned. So you have the launch, expansion 1, expansion 2, expansion 3. And those are theoretically going to be planned, about 2 years apart. Um, and each time that we do an expansion, we're doing similar to what other games have done in the past in the sense that we are um, introducing a new landmass. But we're trying to also stay away from only introducing new land masses and vertical progression, because that's what most games do is they continually just launch new zones and new areas and an onward upward trajectory where by the time you get to expansion 3, all of the zones from expansion 1 are now obsolete and no one goes there anymore. We're trying instead to do a far more horizontal um, content expansion where we will be introducing new places into the world because you have to introduce new land masses to keep people exploring and keep the world evolving, but we're also going to be continually revamping the existing zones to keep players going back there and continually exploring these areas that the game eventually launched with. So, but anyway, the the full version of that map is going to contain you've got Lucimia, you've got the Carpel Empire, which is the northern part of that continent, and then you've got the island nations, which are off to the southwest, and then further to the west across the ocean is the landmass of Sonaria, and some other places that we haven't really talked a lot about yet. There's also the entire underground uh, territory of Gleznarabin, which is where the Dwerhe hail from. So you kind of think like the Underdark from Forgotten Realms. Um, so there's going to be, or the Mines of Moria, and Lord of the Rings. So one of the things we're really looking forward to is the plan at this point is that, the first volume is, volume 1 is all above ground. That's introducing Lucemia as a whole. And then the first expansion introduces the Dwerhe as a playable race, as well as the Elenhai as a playable race. So we will be having starting zones in Elamar Forest, as well as the entire city of Gleznarabin and the underground kingdoms of the Dwerhe. So there will be not only starting zones that are completely underground, but there will also be uh, dungeons and places that you can explore underground. But again, the Volume 2 expansion won't be entirely locked into those 2 new areas. There will also be the Blackmoor Forest and some other things. So, which, if we do things right, that will also be including the Eldenai as a playable race as well. So they're kind of like our version of Dark Elves. So the Elenhai are the forest wood elves. Um, they're also like a hybrid version of like high elves and wood elves. And then the Eldenai are a combination of high elves and dark elves. So having 3 playable races come into Volume 2, introducing a few new starting zones, but also introducing an ongoing exploration of that first main map to continue on in the evolution of the storyline, keeps players into that same area in the realm of Lucemia, and then expansion 3 is when we introduce the islands and the island nations. And when we do that, we're hoping the plan is that by that point we'll also be introducing ships and um, we'll see what we can do with that in terms of you know ship combat and fun sea encounters and stuff like that. But that's when we'll have navigation. And that's when Bobby's work as an astrophysicist really comes into play, because even though we'll have star charts and star maps in volume 1 even, when we come to navigating the seas, that's when star charts and actually navigation as a skill will come into the game. So it'll be really fun to see that. And then of course the evolution is by the time we get to volume 4 as we'll be introducing the landmass of Sonaria. But that version of the map, as I've rambled on about things now, that version of the map will probably produce that next year. Um, I don't think we'll have time to do it this year because right now we're still finishing some other stuff, and I've got to get the final sketches ready so that I have it to the point where I can hand it off to an artist. And we're going to be doing an actual, that's a big project because we're actually going to have, we're looking at a few artists right now who have done work for Dungeons and Dragons and some other big projects, and we want to get an actual, like a 4 foot wide, by 2 foot, like a 4 foot by 2 foot, or something of that size, actually, painted. Um, so we need, that's a big project, and then we will then be taking that and making replicas for the um, the world map, and that version of the map will be produced for the collector's editions that get sold with the full version of the game, which we'll be having up for sale later. In the meantime, um, we at least have all of our pre-orders from the pre-alpha store. All the physical items are done, and we don't have to worry about that anymore, which is really nice. So let's talk a little bit about mismanagement of funds because it's kind of an integral theme to today's topic, because it doesn't only relate to physical items. There is, and I've touched on this briefly in previous episodes, where you start looking at one of the big issues that plagues a lot of Kickstarters and crowdfunded projects is that the people who go into these things don't have any previous business experience, and so they don't know how to manage money. They don't know how to do project management. Um, they just spend money on salaries, um, and very quickly run out of money. So, if I could give one piece of advice to people, um, is that when you're getting your project started, you need to break everything down into sections and segments and do a tally of what you think everything is going to cost, and then add, to be safe, add 25% to all of those totals. And when you get done with that, you should be in a fairly good place. Then take all of that, combine them together, and add another 15 to 25% on top of all of that, because that should theoretically cover all of the sundries, and asides that happen that you didn't think of or you didn't plan for. Because even if you're the most experienced veteran out there, there will be things that crop up because of life, um, and so you have to be prepared for those things. So um, just be ready for that and plan accordingly, and you should be fine. um, but when it comes to physical goods and other sundries, I think that's an area where people often just don't think about it. They don't think about the cost associated with it. And a good example of this is, when we were factoring in shipping the other day. Um, we obviously, the vast majority of our people are from North America. Now, long term, we will have an international product, and we do have international users right now and people internationally who have pre-ordered collector's editions, and we factored those people in pretty accurately. But I will say that even having the experience that I have, um, and knowing all the things that I know in advance, there was one territory in particular that we didn't anticipate the shipping on physical products to, and that was Australia. It costs to ship one copy of the book, just the book. So the book, we've got it priced out at like $20 right now, right? And we could price it cheaper if we did our own printing as opposed to print on demand, but that's a topic for another day. The point is, it's a 2 pound book. It is a big, I don't have it. There's a copy over there in the corner that I'm not going to go dig up right now. But I mean, it's a big, 700 page novel, and it weighs over 2 pounds. Um, it cost us $35 to ship a single copy to Australia. And we have multiple people from Australia. So the unfortunate reality is that we're losing money on shipping to um, to Australia. Now, thankfully, we don't have a lot of people in Australia, but you have to think about those types of things. And unfortunately, that's one of those areas where even though we had thought about all the other scenarios, we didn't plan for Australia being so expensive to ship to. Thankfully, we have enough money set aside for shipping because we included that in the cost of the collector's editions, um, because we kind of anticipated what it was going to cost to ship to Europe and Canada and within the United States. So between the cost of shipping to Europe and the cost of shipping to these other countries and these other territories, we were charging enough to make up for the copies that we're also sending to Australia, so that we're not actually losing any money. We're still coming out ahead. But it's definitely one of those things where we looked at the numbers and went, holy shit, like when we're doing this in the future for, future pre-orders, we're going to have to charge a significant amount more for these items in order to accommodate, the cost of the, people who may be ordering something from Australia. And in terms of the collector's editions, in order to make everything simple, we just charged a flat fee, which does not include a separate shipping charge. So I think, for example, the pre-order tiers, the pre-alpha collector's editions were priced out at $300. So that covers the digital version of the game, the digital PDF that we're going to be creating, which is basically a scrapbook of everything from start to finish. So it has everything from our earliest sketches and our earliest screenshots all the way through to the finished product. And then it also included the cloth map and a sign and a numbered version of the book. So when you factor the cost of production for the maps, the cost of production for the books, and the cost of shipping for the books, I would say there's easily half of the $300 is gone. Um, and then, the other $150 covers not just, so you have to think that it's not just shipping, there's also handling. So good, think about this for a minute. Um, John and I have to go through and sign everything. We have to get everything delivered. And then because we don't have a warehouse, we're not doing drop shipping. So it's all coming to our personal places of residence, and which are doubling as our offices. And from there, we then have to physically take everything, unbox everything, deal with the storage of all these things, deal with getting rid of all the trash from these items, and or recycling. Then we have to deal with the uh, packaging of all of these items into our packaging. Then we have to deal with it. So it's all the handling, the shipping and handling. So the $150 that I just talked about, that's just production costs. That's production and shipping. Now we're talking about the handling, um, and the actual taking care of all of that, and then the physical time that it takes to put everything into the packages and package everything up, the physical time of putting together all of the spreadsheets with everybody's addresses and everybody's contact information so that we can get those things shipped to the proper addresses. And then there's the you know actually taking things down to the office and getting them shipped physically. And by the time you factor in all of the time and effort of the people who are involved in that, um, suddenly you've spent $250 out of your $300, and what you're left with is the $50 that covers the cost of the digital product. So charging $300 for a collector's edition is extremely low end. Like, we did things as tight as we possibly could. If we actually wanted to make a profit, like a profit on these things, we would have charged like $500. But because we were doing pre-alpha pre-order tiers, we tried to do things as tight as we possibly could. So $300, it made us enough money to justify doing it. And we did a little profit. We obviously are making a little bit of money on those, but we're not making gobs and gobs. I mean, if you break it down to what John and I are making on an hourly basis for putting all this stuff together, it's around $10 an hour. So we're not making a big profit, in terms of the time that we put in to put all this stuff together for everyone. There's really no money in it for us. It's just a nice little thing that we're doing. Um, Obviously, there is some money in there, and that's nice, but it's not something where the company is making gobs of money. So the only way that you're going to be able to make money on doing things like that is if you have enough funding to take care of mass production. Because doing print on demand, which is what we did, print on demand is expensive because you're doing small batch quantities. This goes back to what I was talking about in I think it was the most recent podcast, where I was discussing the difference between craft beer and Budweiser, like commercially produced beer. Um, you know, Budweiser can produce it at such a mass volume that they can sell it for $2 a bottle, whereas a craft IPA from a local brewery, they're going to charge $12 a bottle because it costs them so much more to produce this bespoke material. It's the same way for us. You've got to think that the only way they're going to make money on these things is if you mass produce, and in order to do that, you've got to have ideally $100,000, but tens of thousands at the very least to mass produce copies. And to put this into perspective, if I wanted to produce the hardback version of our tabletop book, um, doing it at the volume that we want to do it at, which is not, we're thinking like 1,000 copies the first print run. Um, you know, let's just say the cost of producing the books at that level is going to be around $25 per, um, when you factor in all these things. So you need $25,000 right out the gate to just produce all of those things. And that doesn't cover the cost of shipping everything to people. That's just the cost of production for the books is $25 per copy, just to get them printed. And then you're probably going to need, you know, 15, let's just figure an average of $15 per copy to get things shipped around the world. So that's got to go into the price. And then handling needs to go into the price. And then if you want to make a profit, like a 10% profit, that's got to go into price. That's why if you look at these hardback books, they cost $50 for a traditional hardback tabletop, what is 8 by 11 book, like 300 pages or something. They're $50, $60 because that's the only way these companies can make a profit on these things. And if you look at a company like Dungeons and Dragons, Wizards of the Coast, they're going to go out there, they've got the funding to go out there and print 10,000 copies, so they can get their print costs down to, I don't know, but I'm going to assume based on what I know of the process, which is not a lot, but they could probably get their costs down to around $12, $15, possibly lower, but let's say $12 per book as opposed to the 25 that we're paying per book. So that's one of those things, just that all gets factored in. So I can say that when we do the collector's editions for the final version of the game, they will be much more than $300. They will probably be more in the $500 range because, those are going to be, it's going to be a bigger map. There's a couple of other things that we're going to be included in there, kind of extra bonuses, but we're factoring in the costs for that, and we want to make a little bit of a profit on those as well. So things to think about. So this is the greater episode on funding and talking about the need to set aside money for the production and shipping of your physical items. Again, take the cost, add 25% to it, and think about things like Australia, which is in the middle of nowhere, or New Zealand, and it costs a boatload. And, it might cost us, to give you perspective, it might only cost us, say, you know, $6 to $10 to ship somewhere within the U.S. and Canada. It's going to cost us, say, 15 to 20 to ship to Europe, but it costs $35 to ship to Australia, and that's just international economy. So when you take that, you have to factor in how many copies you think you're going to sell in the domestic market, the US and Canada market, how many copies you think you're going to sell to the European market. And then don't forget to factor in things like Australia, because even though you might only have a few copies in the oceanic market, it's going to cost you a boatload of money to ship there, and you have to factor that in somewhere. So it means that yes, your North American domestic customers are going to end up paying more for shipping than they would if you were only worried about a North American market. But when you're dealing with an international scope, the easiest way to do things for like collector's editions is just, pre-include everything in there in a bulk price, because otherwise you got to try to figure out how you're going to charge shipping individually to all these different people, and that's just a nightmare trying to figure that out, because then there's coding issues with figuring out how you're going to set up all your sales your sales platforms and your shopping carts and everything else. And every platform, whether you're talking about eBay, Amazon, Google, um, PayPal, they all have their unique things that you have to do to set up the criteria for their shipping models, and it's just a nightmare. And it can be done, but the easiest thing is going to just be to bulk everything together and take the average of what it's going to cost across the board and just make that your cost. And theoretically, if you've done that properly, you will come out ahead and you won't be out of money, and you will set things aside and you won't touch it. You won't use it for salaries. You won't use it for anything. It's money set aside. And that's how we did it. And thankfully, we're able to get things out the door ahead of the game, ahead of the curve. So people who pre-ordered from the pre-alpha store now have their items well ahead of the game launch, and we don't have to worry about this anymore. So it's a big weight off our shoulders, um, and we know that that's been taken care of. And now we can just get back to the fun stuff, which is finishing the game, getting it finalized and out the door. So thanks for sticking around and staying tuned to this episode of Diary of an Indie Game Dev. Don't forget to hang out, head over to the Patreon page. I've got some updates coming in the pipeline regarding my evolution into VFX, which has been fun. This past week's been doing just VFX tutorials. We've got the new version of Mondays in mmorpgs is coming. Let me check the calendar. I believe it's the 14th. First new episode of that show should be going live on the 14th of October. I've found my co-host. We're going to be recording the episode on the 10th of this month and going from there. So it's going to be here on YouTube. There's going to be a video version, and then we're going to have the audio recorded separately, and that will be going into a separate version for people who want to listen to it as a podcast. So stay tuned for that. Thanks for everyone for your support. See you on the Patreon. See you in game if you're playing World of Warcraft with us. Until next time, safe gaming. Cheers.